Your Space Coast vacation is preparing for liftoff. Start counting down now. 10, 9, 8, 7. It's time for a beach vacay that feels like heaven. 6, 5, 4. Come explore Melbourne and the beaches. 3, 2, 1. It's time for some rocket-filled fun. Count down to your best beach vacation ever on Florida's Space Coast. Launch your planning now at visitspacecoast.com. That's visitspacecoast.com.
Selling your car to Carvana is as easy as...
As easy as pie?
Sure. All you have to do is enter your license plate or VIN.
As easy as a stroll in the park.
Okay, then just answer a few questions and you'll get a real offer in seconds.
As easy as singing.
Why not? Schedule a pickup or drop off and Carvana will pay you that amount right on the spot.
As easy as playing guitar.
Actually, I find that kind of difficult. But selling your car to Carvana is as easy as...
Can be.
Visit Carvana.com or download the app to get an instant offer today.
Welcome to the Wellness Transcription Podcast, the podcast that combines the power of Christian values with evidence-based nutrition, fitness, and lifestyle content. I'm your host, Dr. Patrick Gurley. Join me each week as we explore the intersections of Christianity and wellness, offering you insights to help nourish your body, mind, and soul. Whether you're looking to improve your physical health or simply strengthen your personal relationship with Jesus, we've got you covered. Stay tuned for inspiring discussions, expert guest interviews, and practical tips to help you live the life God calls us to live. All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Wellness Transcription Podcast. I have a close friend of mine, another expert in his field. He's a great mentor of mine. He taught me in pharmacy school in all things toxicology. And he also runs the Poison Center in Arkansas right now. And he has a board certification in toxicology. So we're going to be basically talking about what toxicity actually means. What does it mean for something to be poisonous or not? And then we'll kind of bleed into just kind of how the Poison Center operates, some interesting things you might want to know on when to call them, what things that you should be looking out for. But I've got Dr. Howell Foster on the show. I really appreciate you being here, Hal. It means a lot that you joined me today. I appreciate it.
Well, I really appreciate you asking me to be on here, Patrick. And for the listeners out there, I will just say this. Patrick's dad taught me. So I'm just kind of passing it along. His dad's a great friend and mentor of my own. So
I sometimes forget about that he taught you in pharmacy school, but he was there for 30 years. So that does make a whole lot of sense. But we'll get into, maybe I'll ask you some questions off the record later about how everything's going at UMS, because I haven't been back since we moved to Austin. But Hal, real quick with the audience, just kind of give us your background. How'd you get involved in the field that you're at now? What was that process like for you when you were in pharmacy school and going forward?
Well, honestly, toxicology came looking for me. I didn't come looking for it necessarily. I did a rotation my senior year in the Poison Center, and it was a drug information tox-based rotation. And I left and went and did a residency at the VA. And in the process of doing that, they had gotten funding at the Poison Center and had been completely funded by the College of Pharmacy up until that time. And they had picked up some extra funding and offered me a stipend to come over and take some call in the evenings for them. And I did that as a resident. I finished my residency. I went to work for the VA and had worked there for not quite a year and a half. And in fact, my 30th anniversary in the Poison Center was 3 days ago. Dr. Charlie Campbell, who was the director at that time, I was working over at the VA, gave me a call and said, "Hey, would you like to come to work for me?" It's like, I really liked that. It was interesting, lots of different clinical type questions. And we did a ton more drug information back in those days than we do now. The phones and the access to the internet is so much better now than it was then. But I was like, sure. So I came over and worked as a specialist in the center for the first 7 years and took over as director in 2000 and have been the director ever since.
Yeah. So tell me real quick, I know you have a toxicology certification. So what was that process like? And I could be wrong, but I know certain practitioners have to go through it's quite a rigorous process to get that Board of Applied Toxicology certification. Can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, there's really two ways to get to it. The easiest way, honestly, in a way, is to do a fellowship. And once you get out of fellowship, certain fellowships around the country allow you to fast track to take the board exam. If you don't do that method, it's going to take you a minimum of about 5 years to be able to even get to the point that you could meet all the criteria for certification. There's research things you have to consult where you're doing actually clinical consultations and have people consulting with you directly, and you have to keep up with all of that. And it's a scoring system that you can go out to it's clintox.org, www.clintox.org, which is the website for the American Academy of Clinical Toxicology. And you can go out, there's a place on there for the ABAT and see what all of the criteria are, but pretty rigorous process. Pretty tough test. So
yeah, I can imagine. I mean, the field of pharmacy in general is the exams are tough, but I can only imagine. I mean, I know Jessie is who also had you as a priest. We were both in pharmacy school. She's studying right now to do her pediatric board certification, and those board certification tests aren't easy, and they shouldn't be. But one of the reasons I thought about you when in the nutrition space that I've kind of found myself in, especially the pharmacy field in Austin, Texas, I get questions about this all the time. And I think a lot of people tend to have some fear around what exactly toxicity means. Like for example, I'll have patients come in and that'll ask me nutrition advice, which happens quite frequently in the pharmacy that I'm at. And they'll say, well, my doctor told me to avoid gluten because it's toxic for me. And I'll ask them, what do they mean by toxic for you? Do you have celiac disease? Like, what does that mean? And elaborate. And you can tell that they really have no idea. It's just something that they're scared about and that they're trying to get some answers and kind of figure out how to combat this issue that they didn't know that they had. So in your field, when you hear someone refer to something as toxic, what does that exactly mean? So like from a poison center toxicologist perspective, when you hear the word poison or toxin, like what do you define that as?
Well, I mean, as well, when you've touched on it, there's one thing as an expert or a clinician, the way you look at it, and then there's the other way the lay public looks at it. So from my perspective, if you come in, all toxins are poisons, and toxins are substances produced by bacteria, animals, plants. So it's a much more narrow poison than just the broad term poison. So poison in and of itself, to me, most things can be poisonous if you can get exposed to enough of them. Dose makes the poison. As Paracelsus said that a little over 500 years ago. But what happens with that is people either give a half-truth or they look at in vitro data, but the in vivo data shows nothing along those lines. And one of the big areas to do that with is look at some of the sunscreens. Now, there have been a few that have been pulled off the market, but if you look at the in vitro data of sunscreens, you would probably never use because of the issues it can cause with DNA. But we have this lovely little thing just below the layer of our skin called our stratum corneum that keeps things from being absorbed. And most of the sunscreen then that you slather on you is not absorbed. In fact, some of them are not absorbed at all, really. And they offer you protection from that standpoint. So you really have to look at where they're coming from. As far as with the gluten thing, me and you both know that while celiac disease is real and gluten will wreak havoc on a celiac patient, for most of us, it's probably not much of an issue at all. And I think sometimes it's easier to tell a patient to avoid things with gluten in them as opposed to getting them to follow a better diet. If you just cut out all of this stuff, you're going to cut out a lot of processed wheat flour and things like that. I think that's where it comes from. But the patient doesn't know what really is poisonous and what isn't.
I'm glad you brought up sunscreens too, because we get asked those questions all the time as well. And I think the big thing that I've come to find out is, and again, you have to kind of go through the training associated to be able to figure these things out. But study design is something that just most people don't know anything about. And unless you're in that field and really know how research is conducted, especially the types of research, you can get vastly different results, and it's not the easiest thing to interpret. So for your example with sunscreen, I think that was perfect, is in the in vitro cell culture studies where you're looking at just certain cell types in a petri dish and you're exposing them to very high amounts of a particular chemical. Yeah, of course, you're going to see some really scary stuff happen. And and again, that's like the first step in research, is to see, well, what does this look like? And then you kind of keep going. But when you apply it to a normal person, you just don't see that. And I think people tend to think our bodies and our biology is way simpler than it really is. Like, we have many different mechanisms and routes to kind of deal with certain issues, especially when it comes to toxicity and stuff like that. And there are ways to handle that. But again, one big thing that bothers me is that people throw around that term to where the more you say stuff is toxic, it's almost like hearing the same thing over and over again. You just stop listening at some point. And it's like, well, what isn't a toxin at this point? Or what can I eat? Or what can I eat? And I think that's a very important point that you elaborated on, because a lot of people just don't understand all that goes into defining a dose of something. Like, water is toxic if you drink too much of it. And again, like, drugs are the same way. Like, I hear this one a lot, especially on social media. It's like, well, the big pharma just wants to keep poisoning us so we can be sick all the time so they can take more of our medications. I hear that all the time as a practitioner now, and it kind of rubs me the wrong way. So let me see how I want to phrase this. So like, I'd say the biggest one would be, let's say glyphosate, for example, like Roundup. That's been kind of in the news a little bit. Certain areas are starting to try to pull glyphosate off the shelves, because if you use it to kill weeds in your yard, you may get exposed to too much of it. But I've seen kind of charlatan type figures in the nutrition space say, well, the oatmeal off the shelf that you get at the supermarket has glyphosate in it, and it's poisoning you if you eat oatmeal every day. So I don't know if when I was on rotation with you, if I had any glyphosate calls. I'm pretty sure I didn't. Have you guys seen any of that? Is that something that y'all get calls about in the poison center? And then how would y'all manage that if someone were to be exposed to something like that? In Arkansas, with all the farming, I'm sure that's probably popped up a time or two.
Well, I couldn't even begin to tell you how many cases of glyphosate exposure I've been subjected to over the last 30 years, but I would guess it's probably well into the hundreds. As a general rule, at least acutely, unless somebody is trying to commit suicide and goes out and drinks a bunch of concentrated Roundup, I don't worry too much about a small exposure to glyphosate. In fact, even in that situation that I just said where somebody's trying to commit suicide, I'm less worried about the glyphosate and typically more worried about the surfactant that's added in there, and that actually causing the acute poisoning or a problem. So I will just tell you the data that I have seen scientifically on even long-term glyphosate is pretty weak. And we'll go back to sunscreens because I will juxtapose it against this. Whenever he's 12 years old now, but I was doing some work for the National Tox Center for the FDA on sunscreens. And I came home and I pulled every sunscreen that had oxy in it out of our house and threw it in the trash can due to the fact it would cross the stratum corneum, and I was worried about potentially DNA changes. I have a large bottle of Roundup sitting in my garage right now that I use to spray weeds with. So, and I do take safety pretty seriously. I think there's a lot of money to be made suing people, and I think the amount of glyphosate that was used around the country was pretty low-hanging fruit for somebody to try to attack. And that's my general feeling on it. Like I said, I'm not overwhelmingly convinced of its long-term toxicity or cumulative toxicity, whatever you want to call it. So,
yeah. I've seen there's certain articles, and I can't remember the name of the group. I should have done my due diligence. And I think it's the Environmental Working Group or something along those lines, is they'll take a lot of the USDA's data on glyphosate exposure and other pesticide exposures, and they'll say they found all these adverse health effects associated with it, and this is why you should use organic versions of these things instead of glyphosate or whatever herbicide, spectricide, whatever that's currently out there. But what they'll do is they'll take all the acute exposure from people who work with it on a daily basis, farmers, stuff like that, where they've accidentally been exposed to large amounts of it in the workplace. and they'll lump that data in and use it to kind of scare people. When in reality, if you look at the amount of glyphosate you've been exposed to when eating a certain food, I'm pretty sure, if I recall correctly, I think the milligrams per kilogram for like an acceptable daily intake is 0.5 for glyphosate. So, I mean, assuming you would even know the amount of glyphosate in a food you're eating routinely, I mean, you'd have to eat quite a bit of it to even get to the point where you'd be concerned with that. I think so let's take me example. If I'm 215 pounds and we do the math, I mean, I'd have to essentially stay under 50 milligrams of glyphosate a day for me to not be worried about an issue. And again, I'm not getting nearly exposed to any of that from a dietary perspective. I am interested to kind of see, are there some, and we can kind of piggyback and bounce back and forth with these topics, but are there certain things, and I kind of know the answer to this question being on your rotation and stuff in pharmacy school, but are there certain things that when you get phone calls in the poison center about them, that the hair on the back of your neck stands up? Like,
absolutely.
As a poison at the poison control center, you get all sorts of calls from all sorts of things. What are some of the things you've seen that I guess the audience might be better suited to know than worrying about someone calling something toxic on the internet that they don't really understand? So what are some of the things that they really need to worry about?
So let me ask you this. Let's ask it a different way, I guess.
Okay.
So are we talking about a toddler getting into something, or are we talking about something in your garage, somebody intentionally overdosing? Because all of those go down different paths.
Sure.
And I will tell you, in general, inside your home, if you use reasonable safety precautions, most of the things other than medicinals in the general part of your home are usually reasonably safe. I mean, obviously, if you dose makes the poison, you drink enough of something, you can have a problem. Now, under the sink, there are a few things under there that can be really problematic. Drain cleaners are one that jumps out really quick that you would find under your counter. Some of those can be incredibly caustic, and even a mouthful could cause just horrific damage in someone, even an adult. Once you leave your house and step out into the garage, there are a lot of things that can be found in your garage that could be really problematic in the wrong situation, I guess. Fuel additives are one that jumps out because this time of year, people are winterizing their boat and things like that. Some of those have large amounts of methanol in them. And small ingestions in a small child, or even relatively small ingestions in an adult, could potentially be a problem. Antifreezes, ethylene glycol containing products are problematic if you're a mechanic or tend to do mechanic work and things like that. Brake fluids can have both ethylene glycol and diethylene glycol in them, which are all potentially problematic substances. And then we move over, we're talking about glyphosate, an herbicide. Like I said, if somebody got a mouthful of it, I'm actually more worried acutely about the surfactant that's in there than I am the glyphosate itself. But as we move over into some insecticides, some of the insecticides with small ingestions could be problematic. Fortunately, some of the more problem ones have been removed from the market, but something for whatever reason, and I don't know why this is, I don't know if we're using more of it now in the rural or in the farm community, but paraquat has been one that has cropped up quite a bit. Now, it's a little different than diquat, which you can actually find in combination, oddly enough, with glyphosate. But paraquat is a much more sinister substance, and a mouthful of it in an otherwise healthy adult could be fatal. So, and even more so to a small child. So there are those types of things. Now, medications, the list can get long really quick, but I will tell one that is, we're kind of getting into the cough cold time of the year that really scares me, that I think even most pharmacists do not appreciate the toxicity of this substance. And that is a very scary substance. They're little round gel-looking beads. I can see a toddler looking at those thinking, hey, that's candy. They are potent sodium. It's a potent sodium channel blocker. So you can develop cardiotoxicity with it really quickly. You can get 200 milligram little capsules of it. Just a few of them in a small child is really bad. We actually had a fatal case. Well, it's probably been about 2 years ago. In a 13-year-old, they made a suicidal gesture, and they took 12, 13 capsules, and it killed them. So that's one that people get. They're little small things. They look pretty innocuous, and they're pretty nasty. Some other meds that we use, the one pill can kill kind of a thing. One pill won't do it, but cold is a drug that is really nasty. Methotrexate, which people use for rheumatoid arthritis, can be really problematic. We've got the big, people don't like to hear this, but hydroxychloroquine is really a poisonous substance. And
Your Space Coast vacation is preparing for liftoff. Start counting down now. 10, 9, 8, 7. It's time for a beach vacay that feels like heaven. 6, 5, 4. Come explore Melbourne and the beaches. 3, 2, 1. It's time for some rocket-filled fun. Countdown to your best beach vacation ever on Florida's Space Coast. Launch your planning now at visitspacecoast.com. That's visitspacecoast.com.
Selling your car to Carvana is as easy as...
As easy as pie?
Sure. All you have to do is enter your license plate or VIN.
As easy as a stroll in the park.
Okay, then just answer a few questions and you'll get a real offer in seconds.
As easy as singing.
Why not? Schedule a pickup or drop off and Carvana will pay you that amount right on the spot.
As easy as playing guitar.
Actually, I find that kind of difficult. But selling your car to Carvana is as easy as...
Can be.
Visit Carvana.com or download the app to get an instant offer today.
everybody was wanting to push that out to during COVID. And if it works, that's fine. It was something that you really need to pay attention to and how it was stored and things like that. It would not take very many tablets to really be a problem in someone. Then, of course, if somebody's on different blood pressure medicines or medicines that directly affect the heart, those all can be pretty concerning pretty quickly. So,
yeah, it's interesting you brought up benzonatate because I'm not as familiar with that, but I have heard that of late. And you're exactly right. We're starting to dispense quite a bit of it in the pharmacy with cough and colds, and even with COVID, like we were seeing a lot of coughing symptoms, and that's one of the common things that we would see that was prescribed with it. And those things, I don't like dispensing them because you're exactly right. They're bright yellow colored. The higher dose ones have this kind of oblong candy looking shape, and they can kind of easily spill on the counter to where like if you weren't careful and you drop some, you may not even, they just scurry away really fast. So you wouldn't even see them. And so when if you take a call like that, let's just use benzonatate as an example. What's the kind of protocol y'all follow in the poison center to kind of manage that? How does that look?
Well, pretty much. It's not going to take much benzonatate to get me moving you to the emergency room, especially if it's a child. So, and my staff know this, and they're well trained with it. They're going to, in most situations, if somebody just immediately did that, and we felt like we could get them to the emergency room quicker by car, send you by car. Now, in other situations, we may direct you to call an ambulance to come get the individual because these things are absorbed pretty quickly. They're going to get symptomatic pretty quickly, and we're going to move on them pretty quickly. I mean, basically, in my opinion, we got a fairly small toddler. If they knock off more than 200-300 milligrams, or I have any uncertainty about dose, they're going. We're not keeping them at home. On the therapeutic side, I will just throw this one out there on benzonatate since we're talking about it. Do not bite and swallow. That used to be a pretty common way that we would see prescriptions written. And I get it. It's a potent sodium channel blocker, and that's why we're worried about the toxicity. But if you think about what are sodium channel blockers, a lot of them are anesthetics. They take away pain and stuff, which is why we're giving it to you for sore throat to a degree and cough. So biting that thing will numb your throat. The problem is you can numb your throat so much that you relax your upper airway that you can't clear secretions. So you can run into a problem with that. Not being able to swallow or even cough at all there's some issues related with that. So
yeah, I always counsel on that. And no matter when I dispense that, I'm like, please do not crush or chew this. And you'd be surprised. Like a lot of people don't think about that kind of thing. And they'll ask me, well, why shouldn't I? I'm like, well, this is why. However, you just don't want to get all that dose at one time, especially you don't want it locally getting absorbed quickly before it gets to where it's supposed to. That's one that was surprising to me because I don't know if we were taught that one, particularly in pharmacy school. I know I have a lot of friends of mine that are starting to have kids. Me and my wife are in that realm here at some point, like in the near future. That's something we'll start considering. And I get questions all the time, especially from close friends of mine. Hey, I have a toddler. They're in that mobile phase where they're running around, getting into everything. What do I need to not have in the house? Or what is there any, like, what stuff gets me concerned? And I remember answering this question for someone. They asked me, they're like, hey, I'm not talking about the drain cleaners and stuff like that. We don't have that in the house. He goes, is there anything else that we're concerned about? And I go, and I just happen to know that the wife of my friend has been diagnosed with anemia in the past. So she takes ferrous sulfate, routinely to help with that. That's a pretty common medication, but I told them you need to really be careful with iron, especially around little kiddos. And I remember you giving us quite a lecture on that in pharmacy school and how that gets your attention, especially if there's too much of it. So that's a fairly innocuous substance that I feel like a lot of people wouldn't think twice about. But what happens if, let's say, a kid gets into a bottle of that kind of thing? Or at what point with multivitamins or something do you get concerned? Stuff that kids could easily get into.
So that's a pretty good question. We'll go off in a couple of different directions here, but we'll stay with iron initially. Those 325 milligram ferrous sulfate tablets that get dispensed as a prescription, particularly in prenatal situations, most of those all look like candy to a toddler. They're all sugar coated. They're either green or red usually. And the thing that we forget as adults sometimes is a child will pop that tablet in their mouth and they'll begin to suck that sugar coating off of it. And as soon as that sweet taste leaves and any other taste replaces it, they're either going to do one or two things. They're either going to spit it out or they're going to swallow it. And sadly, let's use a 22-pound child. So technically that supposedly is a normal 2-year-old at 22 pounds. I may beg to differ with that in our society now, but that's a 10-kilo child. So a 325 ferrous sulfate tablet is going to have 65 milligrams of elemental iron. So 10 of those would put you at 65 milligrams per kilo of elemental iron. That is going to put that child, they're definitely going to have symptoms. They're going to have some GI symptoms from that. Nausea, vomiting, probably some diarrhea. That is a threshold that begins to make me really concerned. And as you start adding it, it only took 10 tablets for us to get there. And if you've ever watched a kid eat a bag of Skittles or a bag of M&Ms or whatever, they can take down 10 pretty quick. You push that out to 20, that's a lethal dose. So, and unfortunately, and I hate to talk about cases, and I will keep them as generic as I possibly can because of HIPAA, but we've, in the last year and a half, had a case. Mom's in the shower, 2.5-year-old gets into her, she's pregnant, gets into her supplemental iron that is on the counter. She gets out of the shower. There are tablets spilled on the floor. She questions. The toddler basically says, no, I didn't eat any. She gets the tablets picked up, and the child begins to have a half hour, 45 minutes later, begins to have protracted nausea and vomiting. And they call the center. We refer them in. They go to the small rural hospital that's adjacent to where they live at. Child is definitely really symptomatic at this point. Definitely got some metabolic changes whenever we look at some of their blood. And we call and get transferred to Children's. Child is transferred to Children's within the first 3 to 4 hours of the ingestion. Child's dead 11 hours later. So, and we, in that situation, that's a pretty quick time frame to us. We got them to a place where we could start giving them desferoxamine. We pushed the dose of desferoxamine. We did some really interesting things with some plasma exchange on them, trying to do that to get the iron out. You're just too far behind the 8 ball at that point. Even though we have an antidote, if you really start doing the math on how much desferoxamine will bind, you just can't get ahead of the train. So, and I don't mean this to scare people, but I do mean it to scare people, I guess, because those are things that, from a pharmacist standpoint, and I tell students this all the time, that bottle should not leave the pharmacy in a snap cap. It should have a child-resistant cap on it. And just because it has a child-resistant cap on it doesn't mean the child can't open it. It just means that a certain percentage of children cannot open it. There's still some that will be able to open it, because if we made them completely child-proof, adults couldn't get in them either.
Correct.
So iron, I'm glad you brought up iron. That's a good one. So one of the things is, now with chewable vitamins, and gum, things like that. Everything seems to come in a dadgum gummy now. But the good thing, for whatever reason, kids seem to tolerate the iron that is in those chewable tablets a little better than they do, for whatever reason, in that big dose of ferrous sulfate. And it's unusual for a child to be able to get enough of the chewable iron tablets or the chewable multivitamins that have some iron in them for them to get to a really serious point with those. And part of it's just due to the amount of iron that's in them. But
Sure.
there's that. The other one, though, is you see some bad press out there about melatonin. And I will just tell you, my general feeling on melatonin is melatonin in and of itself is probably not much of a toxicant. It doesn't cause cumulative sleepiness. So it's not like taking a benzodiazepine for sleep, where if you take one, you get a little sleepy, but if you take 20, you get the CNS depression is significantly more. Melatonin's not that way, and it doesn't appear to be a problem. Now, where the problem lies, where you look at some of the data that's out there that implicates melatonin, there's usually something else. And so those are the areas where we get a little concerned. We ask a few more questions about melatonin, but in general, we don't get too up in arms about melatonin. So.
Yeah, I tell people that all the time. I get some of those questions occasionally, like my kid got into some melatonin, and then I still remember from my time with you guys the month at the Poison Center, it's just that's really not a concern unless there's other products, again, or if they're taking it with other things. One of the big things for me is and I don't know why they still make it this way, but since we talked about iron, I feel like this is an important thing to know about. And like ferrous sulfate is not the most appealing looking. It does look like candy or a Skittles or something. But I would say the one that I really worry about, looking like candy, is the ferrous gluconate, like the little green ones. I mean, you'd be hard pressed if you glanced at that, or if that fell on the floor, that would look like green M&Ms to a kid. And that's one of the things that I think we do kind of bad as a society, is like sometimes it's really hard to distinguish between medicines or candy. And I remember going to elementary schools and middle schools in pharmacy school and talking to them about it. We had a little slideshow where I would have them guess which one was candy and which one wasn't. And you'd be surprised by how many people couldn't tell the difference. Even adults, even teachers in the room were like, I had no idea. It's startling. And I think a lot of people don't know. And what's another point I'll make is I think people need to realize that if there's any question in mind, if a kid got into something, just please call the Poison Center, because even if you're not sure, having that resource at your disposal is crucial, I think. I mean, I remember getting all sorts of calls when I was on rotation with you. I got a call one time about a pig in another state got in and ingested a bunch of fire ant killer. It was just this crazy call that I remember getting that. And I asked you, I go, Hal, I don't know how to handle this. He goes, oh yeah, you do. You're good. Just, you know what that is. And it just happens to be in an animal and not a human. And there's also vet poison control, which I think is kind of cool too. Cause my dog, if I drop anything on the floor, if I'm not right there, I mean, it's gone. So
yeah. Well, not to really get off into veterinary stuff, because I'm definitely not veterinary trained, but this time of year, I mean, there are a few things that you probably should worry about with your pets. And one of those things, a lot more candy around this time of year. We just had Halloween, going into Christmas, be a lot of different kinds of candy then, is sugar-free candies, and particularly dogs. Xylitol, which is an artificial sweetener, or technically, I don't guess it's just a sugar alcohol, but it doesn't take much xylitol to kill a dog. And we can eat xylitol. It probably causes some gastritis and diarrhea if we eat too much of it, but it causes them to release insulin, and they'll develop an insulin coma and die. So you need to be really careful with that. Chocolate in the dogs, we get a lot of questions still about that. Milk chocolate in and of itself, most of it really isn't chocolate to begin with. A lot of what's labeled as milk chocolate, there is real milk chocolate out there, don't get me wrong. But milk chocolate probably isn't a big deal in most situations. Now, the darker chocolates, especially this stuff, whenever you start seeing 70%, those can be problematic pretty quick. So be aware of those. Animals are interesting, and well, a lot of the things will affect us pretty much in the same way as it will them. There are some definite, really interesting differences between us and cats and dogs and whatnot. So.
Yeah, I think I remember one time our Great Dane that we have, I love her to death. She's the best dog. but I had inadvertently dropped a pack of gum on the floor. And she ran over to look at it. But again, it's all wrapped up in foil, so you can't really smell it too much. But and then I picked it up real quick. But that's one of those things is xylitol's in chewing gum. So like if you gave a dog, or if a dog got into chewing gum, it's not only a choking hazard to them potentially, but there's a decent amount of xylitol in there. And it's in places you may not think of. I mean, that's one of the downsides to not knowing these things. I'm also glad you brought up methotrexate, because I remember you giving us quite a scare on methotrexate when I was in pharmacy school. I still remember that conversation. And every single student that comes through our pharmacy on rotation, I always ask them what they know about it and what their concerns are. I do see a lot of methotrexate still for rheumatoid arthritis and stuff. I don't get too many questions about it, but it's one of those things where I always have to be on alert on how it's packaged in the pharmacy, or you never want a patient to take that daily instead of once a week, or in situations where they're maybe undergoing chemotherapy where they're getting high doses of it. What other ones, like, let me ask you this question. Are there any situations, I get asked this one a lot too, is people will ask about activated charcoal. Like if they thought a kid got into something, if they call the poison center immediately, let's say the mom was there and saw a kid ingest something, at what time frame do y'all think that activated charcoal is useful, or like bentonite clay or something like that to help with an acute toxicity issue of something?
Well, the one way we're going to handle it is we're going to look, and if we didn't give any charcoal at all, would we refer the child? And if the answer to that is yes, I think the chances that we're going to recommend that you give charcoal at home is probably pretty small. We've moved away from we don't use nearly as much charcoal as we used to. And if you don't need to give charcoal, then if you determine, well, no, I mean, it's something that the charcoal will actually bind, but we don't need to give the charcoal, well, then there's a pretty good chance, if the dose wasn't high enough for us to even consider giving the charcoal, probably going to keep you at home and just watch you for a certain set of symptoms. So from an at-home standpoint, we're rarely going to use charcoal. In most situations, though, if you're going to give charcoal, you want to give it within the first hour. If you look at a large number of medications, a bunch of them, we have almost complete absorption within about 60 to 90 minutes. Now, there are plenty of meds we can go out and look at that have much more delayed absorption factors to them, but that's the general rule. Now, from a clinician standpoint, say somebody has it's an intentional ingestion, and they've ingested a acetaminophen diphenhydramine combination product. And if we were going to give charcoal in that situation, I may actually, as long as we have good GI motility and we wanted to give charcoal in that situation, I may give it hours after the ingestion, due to the fact of the diphenhydramine decreasing some GI motility and not emptying the gut as fast. And there's data to show that really does happen. We get delayed peaks and stuff with acetaminophen in combination with diphenhydramine. So, there are some situations where we may go hours out and give it. And then there are situations where we actually give repeat dose activated charcoal. So we're trying to pick up drugs that undergo enterohepatic recirculation, and we'll pick them up in the small part of the gut. Once they're excreted back into the gut lumen, you could pick them up again, even though they've already been absorbed, which is kind of an interesting concept in and of itself. But that list of substances we're going to do that with are pretty small. So,
again, I know a lot of the answers to these questions, and I'm sorry to I'd love to go off on rabbit holes and get into the weeds, but most of the people that listen to the show are wanting to know simple things. So I'd be hard pressed to interview someone with expertise in toxicology without asking about Tylenol. Is that still, that's pretty well known, especially in the medical community, of what to look out for as far as grams per day. Do you guys still see a lot of Tylenol issues? I know we've kind of touched on it briefly in the answers that you've given, is that it's something that a lot of people aren't aware of, but it does happen, is suicides are a big call that you guys get. So could you just give, for someone who may not know anything about Tylenol toxicity, what does that look like? What amounts concern you? And then what type of situations would you use to treat that? Like I said, I know all the answers to these, but it's important that people know those types of what amounts of Tylenol get you guys concerned.
So, in general, Tylenol isn't quite as cut and dry as everybody wants to make it out to be from a toxin standpoint, I guess. Or if we got to discussing acetaminophen toxicity at a toxicology convention for clinical toxicologists, it would not take more than just a couple of minutes for an argument to break out over how to approach these or certain aspects of it. But in general, you should adhere to the no more than 4 grams a day. And in any single one-time dose of 10 grams in an adult, we're definitely going to be concerned about that. And we actually typically still use the 7.5 gram threshold in our own center for referring people, because let's think about that. So 7.5 grams is going to be 15 500 milligram tablets. The chances that's an accidental single ingestion are pretty small.
Your Space Coast vacation is preparing for liftoff. Start counting down now. 10, 9, 8, 7. It's time for a beach vacay that feels like heaven. 6, 5, 4. Come explore Melbourne and the beaches. 3, 2, 1. It's time for some rocket-filled fun. Countdown to your best beach vacation ever on Florida's Space Coast. Launch your planning now at visitspacecoast.com. That's visitspacecoast.com.
Selling your car to Carvana is as easy as...
As easy as pie?
Sure. All you have to do is enter your license plate or VIN.
As easy as a stroll in the park.
Okay, then just answer a few questions and you'll get a real offer in seconds.
As easy as singing.
Why not? Schedule a pickup or drop off and Carvana will pay you that amount right on the spot.
As easy as playing guitar.
Actually, I find that kind of difficult. But selling your car to Carvana is as easy as...
Can be.
Visit Carvana.com or download the app to get an instant offer today.
Right.
So we're going to err on the side of caution. Acetaminophen in the United States is the number one overdosed substance, hands down. There is not a close second. We deal with it every single day, multiple times a day. And it still kills lots and lots of people in the overdose world. Here's the sad thing about mental health in this country, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you I know any answers. I just know there's a problem. So I recently ran our data in our own center, and it does match what I know nationally. And that is, since 2005 in the Arkansas Center, our number of suicide cases has more than doubled.
That's
Whenever
startling.
we start to break, whenever you go to pediatrics in general, so we're using 18 years and less, it's over 300% increase in suicide attempts by our exposure volume. Here's the really frightening, scary, sad part of all of that. If we take and look at just kids 12 years of age or less, our increase is over 800%. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know the answer. I just know there's a real problem with mental health in this country.
Yeah,
And I mean, we've had a case of an attempted suicide in a 5-year-old, and there is no doubt in my mind it was an actual attempt. I don't know what world you live in, well, I do kind of know what world you live in. You live in the same world I do for the most part. But what is so messed up in a 5-year-old's life that pushes them to do something like that? And I'm not talking this. I mean, this was a full-blown, verbalized, rational reason, or at least as rational as a 5-year-old can be, answer to the question as to why you did this. And man, it's hard to wrap your head around a 12-year-old. So
yeah, I couldn't imagine have as a parent. I mean, I'm not a parent yet, but I mean, any parent, that would not be something like, just in general. I wouldn't think to worry about my kindergartner going through some sort of issue at school, whether it be bullying or exposure to social media at too early of an age, which I think those two things definitely play a role. I'm not saying that's the only reason a kid like that would have. There's tons of other issues. And it still startles me today that even like this is more prevalent with like teenagers and college students. I don't know how prevalent this is in schools still, but when I was in college, there was a notorious night where I was showing up to basically get some of the guys from my school from a party. They went, they were like, hey, this isn't looking good. Like, we don't want to be around this stuff. So they were like, hey, can you come get us? They knew I was up studying for something. So I went, picked them up, but I walked in the fraternity house to kind of find them. And I look off to my left and there's just people sitting there with a giant, like, it looks like a big bowl you would put Halloween candy in. And there were just pills and tablets just everywhere. And people were just taking handfuls of just random capsules and tablets and taking them, not knowing what they're ingesting. And I don't know how prevalent that is still, but I know that it's prescription medications and it's not too out of the realm of possibility for a kid to go into a medicine cabinet and find something. And that's definitely something that I really don't know as a pharmacist how much better we can do to prevent that issue. And I always tell people, like, especially if you have small children at home, just if you have any medications anywhere, they cannot be within arm reach of that child at any point. And then child resistant containers. I even, with young kids in the house, will discourage parents from having those little pill dividers where they will organize the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday's dose in those little snap containers, just so kids don't get into those. Are there any tips that you would give, like, from a center perspective on how to prevent accidental overdoses? I mean, the intentional ones is a whole different ball game, but as a parent listening who wants to know what's the best thing that they could do, or what are some of the things that you would do as a parent, how in that situation to just try your best to try to hedge your bets from any of that happening?
Well, the first thing that you said, or one of the things you said a while ago that I believe is absolute, is it can't be in arm's reach. You don't have them sitting on the nightstand. You don't, where a toddler can just walk up and get it. In general, up high and out of sight is the best thing. And then, I mean, I'll tell you, my older sister, great mother, great parent, had an 8-ounce bottle of acetaminophen elixir in the top of their closet. You go into a bedroom, you open the closet, and there's that shelf that's up high. She'd put the diaper bag up there. My nephew, when he was about 2, climbed on top of the dresser, got the strap on the diaper bag, pulled it down, and drank an entire 8-ounce bottle of acetaminophen elixir. And you do the milligram per kilo on that, and he's way over. So he had to go in, and I had to call the hospital and basically give them a recommendation on my own nephew. And so even, I guess I'm telling you that to say, we're going to have some kids that are really going to be climbers. They're really going to be adventurous. And if they get into stuff once up high, you got to start thinking about what else do you do? Do you lock the cabinet? Go get a toolbox that has a locking mechanism on it and put them in that if you have to. If you have a toddler that is really driven to do things, and, we have toddlers that are repeat offenders, and, the moms and dads are like, I'm doing everything I can do to keep them out of it, and they just seem to be able to get into it. And you got to take some pretty extreme measures whenever that starts happening. Lock and key, and I know that's not convenient, but sitting in an emergency department while your child is intubated and IVs and all going on them is not very convenient either. I can assure you that. It's the whole really scary. So
yeah. So I really wish I could have had Jessica on the podcast too, because she's well in the pediatric space, especially down here at Dell Children's in Austin. There's all sorts of kids get into all sorts of things down there. One thing that, again, I still don't know how this is. Well, I do, but I mean, because kids can get into it pretty easily, but it's still concerning. They've had quite a few cases of button battery issues that at least I've heard of recently. I know parents are kind of aware of what can happen with those, but I'd be hard pressed to not ask you about those because parents are kind of aware. What happens if a kid gets into that? At what point? I mean, how many of those have you seen? And then I'll ask you a few more simple ones, and then we can get into some obscure things before we end the show.
Okay. Go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, just a little bit. I wouldn't be my dad's son if we didn't go down the rabbit hole or get into the weeds, so to speak, just a little bit.
Well, that's what I've missed most about your dad being up there. I would go down to his office and we would go down the rabbit holes together. But the button battery issue, it's a really big issue. And I can tell you the lithium batteries are they are a bigger issue than the alkaline type little batteries. If you get the big, so if you look at the numbers on some of the batteries, it will tell you how many millimeters they are essentially. And if you start getting into those batteries that are 20 millimeters in size or bigger, and those are the large flat batteries like you'll see in a camera and things like that often. In fact, I think like on my iPad, I have a keyboard for it and it's run off of 2 of those batteries. Those are problematic in kids big time because they're much more likely to have an esophageal location or not past the pylorus. And if we can get them to moving and get them out, they're probably going to be okay. But man, if you get one that stops somewhere, that's really a problem. So one of the things we will do at home with a button battery is in that first hour, every 10 minutes, give basically 2 teaspoons of honey so that by the end of an hour, you've gotten 60 mils of honey into somebody. And that honey will coat in the stomach or in the esophagus, will help coat that battery, and it will decrease its ability to conduct. So you have less risk of having damage secondary to that. That's what you worry about, is that battery getting caught in a fold and being able to conduct electricity across that fold. You can end up with a burn and things like that. So the honey thing is pretty much in everyone's protocol. If you go out and look at the National Button Battery Guidelines, they're going to recommend 10 cc's of honey every 10 minutes. So 6 times over an hour, that's 60 mils. And it's to help coat that battery.
I can honestly say I have never heard of that.
And I will tell you this, if they're really big batteries, we're probably well, there ain't no probably to it. If they're above 20 millimeters, we're definitely sending you in. And we're going to try to get an x-ray to see if we can locate it and then make sure we get it to moving. And if not, we got to go get them. So,
yeah, that's no fun. I know. I know of certain stories of parents that they're like, we don't have any of those anywhere near. And then they'll be like, oh, I forgot that I left the TV remote out or something. And it fell on the floor. The back flew off of it and the button battery got out of there. And I've heard some scary stories about those. I think that's on a lot of kids' radar. I know some other things that at least I always try to go out of my way to counsel patients on. And again, I don't see this too often, but I do caution parents who do take CBD products to kind of keep those away, especially the flavored ones, away from kiddos, just because I honestly, despite my dad's expertise in CBD and stuff, I don't know enough about it to go, oh, if they had this much, they'll be fine. And I know with certain CBD products, you never know what other exposure to, whether that be THC or some other illicit drug. Right. But with how common CBD is now, I know that's another concern that I have. Keeping that out of their reach.
Yeah, I didn't bring it up specifically, but with the melatonin, sometimes we'll see CBD added to melatonin, and that's one we look for. So here's the thing, and do I think in general most THC is pretty safe? Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It is. But whenever we start to look at the literature and everybody goes, well, look at all of this literature that we have on THC, and it shows that it's really, really safe. And I'm like, okay, what percentage of THC did they use in those studies? And if you look at the overwhelming bulk of literature that's out there, if it's more than 6%, it's an outlying study. We've got THC products now that are well over 40%.
Oh, yeah.
And a toddler gets into that, they are going to have some scary type symptoms to try to manage at home. And people go, well, there's never been a fatality associated with one. Well, there is one in the literature. If it's not in the literature, it's going to come out in the literature. Now, did the kid get positional and asphyxiate or something like that from having so much CNS depression from it? Maybe. But these products are not for the faint of heart sometimes as far as the amount of THC in them. And I don't really know where to hang my shingle out there or draw my line in the sand with some of this because there's just not any data out there on the really high concentrated products.
Yeah, I see that. I remember I went and visited when I was still in pharmacy school. I went and visited my dad when he first moved down to Mississippi to work for NCMPR. And he introduced me to one of the world's experts on CBD and THC, Dr. Olsholi, who I'm trying to get on the show at some point. They were doing a CBD study at the time, And what they'd done is they had gone around Mississippi and grabbed random CBD products from a variety of different CBD shops and stuff like that. And they tested them to see if what the amount in the bottle was on the label. And again, they also had products where they were third party tested. They'd gone through extensive testing to know that the dose was right and those were fine. But there were some that claimed to have these crazy amounts of CBD in them, and they had none. And there were also, I remember him showing me one bottle, and there was this big, it looked like someone dropped a rock in this bottle. And he goes, "You see what's at the bottom of that?" And I go, "Yeah, I see it in there, but that doesn't look like it belongs in there." And he goes, "Yeah, it's a 100% pure CBD. Like I can't even begin to fathom how much of a dose that is in that bottle." And then most of them just had I think one of them just had olive oil or something like that in there. And it was just the whole point of all of it was all over the map, and you have no idea what you're getting. So, and I can see that making your job harder, trying to figure out, hey, that would be a thought in the back of my mind is, do I treat this like this is exactly the dose each time that's in there, or are we really not sure? And I feel like at that point, you would just have to hedge your bets on, well, we're not entirely sure, but we need to have them go get evaluated anyway. Let's see, what are some other interesting questions? I asked my wife this the other day, especially when over the summertime, it's not so prevalent now. This is more of in my curiosity, just because I want to hear your opinion on it. I'm in Texas and you're in Arkansas, so I know snake bites are common as well. I have to ask your opinion because Jesse's told me her opinion on it. I know if you guys are dealing with a rattlesnake or a copperhead or one of those types of snakes, and I know the protocol is either some form of antivenom. Do you guys use it either at UAMS or some other institution? Do y'all typically reach from a poison control center aspect, do y'all reach for CroFab or do y'all reach for one of the other ones?
Well, we have, I don't want to get in any trouble here. I know people at both companies really well. We have CroFab on formulary at UAMS. But whenever anyone calls the center and asks me, which antivenin do you recommend? I will say whichever one you have.
Yep.
It doesn't, if I'm going to need to give you antivenin, I'm just going to give you the appropriate dose of whichever product you have. Now, with that being said, here's something that falls into the nutritional world that we need to think about. And at least geographically here, and maybe not so much where you're at. So the Lone Star tick, named after Texas because of the white spot on its back, Amblyomma americanum, has been shown in some individuals that get bit by the tick to predispose them to developing hypersensitivity reactions to alpha-gal.
I have a very close friend whose wife has that exact thing and got it from a tick bite.
So our experience right now, and this is unpublished data, and we're working on some things. Right now, my best guess is individuals are more likely that have alpha-gal sensitivity, may be more likely to react. And the reason that I say that, and we're actually we're doing work on this right now. So that is my bias in this, and I had to be careful with that. We're running roughly in our center about a 30% adverse reaction clip to Antivip with about 6-7% adverse reaction rate with CroFab. And we're beginning to pull a little data to show that at least some of these reactions, the patients are alpha-gal positive. And am I to the point that I'm going to come out and tell somebody not to carry Antivip? No, I'm not to that point. Yeah. I mean, the data isn't robust enough, but we're definitely looking at that right now. And are there things that we potentially could do to reduce the risk of reaction? Because I think Antivip has some really cool properties to it that make it different than CroFab. And I can tell you, if I was in Arizona and where pretty much all I got were rattlesnake bites and I have no real risk of alpha-gal there, and the length of time that it may prevent coagulation issues, Antivip's pretty appealing. So it's kind of it's a hard thing there. So, but the short answer to a long-winded discourse here is the fact that we'll use whatever you have. And
Sure.
Like I said, I've had pharmacy managers call and say, which one do you recommend us carrying? And I'm like, whichever one your P&T committee wants you to have on formulary. So,
Yeah.
and that's pretty much the way it is.
Go ahead. Sorry, I mean to cut you off.
Now, if you need it, we're gonna use what, like I said, the appropriate dose of whatever you have. So,
yeah, I was talking to Jessie that I was going to have you on, and she was like, I've seen, especially over the summertime, especially here in Texas, there's a certain flower that like blooms on the side of the road. Here, they're these little blue, they're
the blue bonnets.
The blue bonnets. That's correct. I was blanking on it. So Jessie was telling me that a lot of kids will go take photos in the blue bonnets and they won't see the snakes that are there. So they said that they were getting a lot of snake bites at that time. And when I told her I was thinking about having you on the show before I asked you, she was like, ask Hal if he has any preference, not necessarily a preference, but what his opinions are on Crovat versus Anavit. They have both at Dell Children's, and they use whatever they feel like they need to. But it's one of those things I just wouldn't have thought too much of, because like you said, my gut reaction would be whatever you have is what we'll do. That alpha gal thing I had no idea about.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So Tuximab is the product. That was the big New England article, and those patients were reacting, and those reactions were.
Your Space Coast vacation is preparing for liftoff. Start counting down now. 10, 9, 8, 7. It's time for a beach vacay that feels like heaven. 6, 5, 4. Come explore Melbourne and the beaches. 3, 2, 1. It's time for some rocket-filled fun. Countdown to your best beach vacation ever on Florida's Space Coast. Launch your planning now at visitspacecoast.com. That's visitspacecoast.com.
Really severe. And that's all alpha-gal related. And if you look at the reactions to Tuximab and look at the distribution of the Lone Star tick, the two areas overlay, and the folks that were not reacting to cetuximab in the other regions of the country, they weren't reacting in the same way. This was a regionalized thing. And our feeling right now is that alpha-gal binding site on one of those fragmented portions of those antibodies, is it more prominent on the FAB2 as opposed to just the FAB portion of the other product? And I don't know the answer to that. And I don't think right now anybody knows the answer to that. But we feel like that is driving some of this difference in reaction that we're seeing. So we're actually working with Oklahoma, and we're trying to pull a couple of other regions in the country in to really look at this and see, is it something that's just an anomaly here and really isn't alpha-gal related, or is it kind of the same regions of the country showing this reaction?
One other question I get a lot about, or I get asked a lot about in the pharmacy, and then I want to touch on one other thing that's not poison center related, is I have been asked multiple times if I need to be, because apparently scorpions are a thing here. We had some of them in Arkansas and I'd see them occasionally, but apparently down here in Austin, they're everywhere. Our little neighborhood Facebook group where we live, I mean, I see scorpion postings all the time. And I've had a few patients at the pharmacy that are new to Austin, because we have a lot of people moving here, asking what they need to do if they run into any scorpion issues. So I'd be hard pressed to ask. I know you've dealt with that at the Poison Center. Is there anything there that you're monitoring for? Is there a particular kind in our areas that we would be concerned about?
Again, most scorpion stings in the United States hurt.
Yeah.
Period. I mean, that's the thing. I'm sorry you got stung. That's really, it's uncomfortable. I get it. Let's treat things a little bit symptomatically. It's going to be not fun for a day or two, but you're going to be okay. If you move into areas, mainly areas of Arizona, down in along the Mexican border there, they had the bark scorpion, which is a Centroides species, and I can't remember the exact species, Centroides. I can't remember its species name. Those are a little more problematic, and there is antivenin actually for those. It's Anascorpt, and it's actually made by the same company that makes Anavip, which is Rare Disease Therapeutics, RDT. And they will use it there. So, but in Austin, I don't have that scorpion there. You got the same variety of scorpions we have here.
Yeah.
They sting and they hurt. So,
yeah, that's the question. That's what I tell people. It's like, hey, they just hurt, but there's really nothing I'd be concerned about. But I get It's always on. I work a lot of Saturday shifts at our pharmacy, and I get all sorts of just weird off the wall questions. And I got asked about that from a lady who'd recently moved here. If she goes, everybody's telling me I need to worry about scorpions and blah, blah, blah. Are there any, before we end the picking your egg, I could talk to you for a long period of time about different pharmacy and toxicity issues. Are there any other areas out the top of your head that we may not have touched on here that you feel like the audience may need to know if they're curious about those things? And then this is a real simple question to follow up with that is, how do they get in contact with you guys at the Poison Center?
Well, let's take care of that one first, because that one's real easy. So anywhere in the United States, you can call 800-222-1222, and that will route you to the Poison Center based on the area code from which you are calling. So that's the only number you need to know nationally, and that will get you to a Poison Center in your area. Then again is 800-222. So pretty easy to remember. 3 2s, a 1, 3 2s. It's the holiday season, and we get a lot of questions about things around the holidays. For the most part, most of the things, poinsettias, I was told as a kid, they're poisonous. Poinsettias are really not much to worry about. If you handle them a lot, there's a risk of maybe some contact dermatitis from it. Mistletoe, somebody ate quite a bit of it. I think they could have some problems with it. Usually not much of a problem. A couple of holly berries in a child, really not much of an issue. I actually worry more about a kid maybe halfway swallowing a leaf and getting one of those spiny things stuck somewhere down in their esophagus or something. But for the most part, they're pretty benign. Let me see. What are some other interesting things? One thing, it's not as prevalent now. People don't make as much homemade candy as probably they used to, but my mom used to make wintergreen candy every year. She had a little jar of methyl salicylate that she would flavor this pan of candy with. And I was always amazed as a kid that she would make it in a 9x13 cookie sheet, and it would only take a few drops of oil of wintergreen to flavor that entire pan of candy. And she had this little 3.5 ml bottle that she kept up in her cabinet. And she had that my entire childhood, and it was still 3/4 or better full the last time I remember seeing it. With that being said, methyl salicylate has a skull and crossbones on it for a reason. And it gets back into kind of what we started with. Dose makes the poison. What's there? So oil of wintergreen flavoring is methyl salicylate. It's akin to aspirin in a way. It's a salicylate. But you can get bigger bottles of it. You can get a 30 ml bottle of it. A teaspoon in our toddler again is enough to kill them. So you got this deadly poison that you can make something really nice out of, which I really enjoyed my mother's oil of wintergreen candy when I was a kid. But that's one of the things, if you're going to have around your house, there's a reason why it has a skull and crossbones on the bottle. Most of the other things around the holidays aren't too much of a problem. Something will crop up from time to time, a new toy or things like that may have an issue related to it, but it's usually a reasonably safe month. So
yeah. Correct. I got an interesting question that you just brought up. So what area of what time of year do you guys say you would get most of your calls? Would it be summertime when kids are home from school?
That's a good question, and the answer is absolutely that is the correct answer. If you look at Poison Center data, January, February, March, April, May, it's flat. The volume is statistically the same. About June, we start to see this uptick. It peaks toward the end of July and begins to start its downhill slope again in August. And by September, it's pretty much flat again. In September, October, November, December, it's flat again. It's the same. So, yeah, those summer months, and there are multiple reasons for it. Kids are out of school. More people are outside. They come in contact with more plants. They come in contact with more animals, things that bite and sting. Using more chemicals, you're using more herbicides, you're using more pesticides. So all of that equals a busier summer.
Yeah. I figured that was the case. That's typically how it goes. You have more foot traffic in the pharmacy. We have more. Jesse says the hospitals are definitely more active in the summer now that when kids are at home. So one last thing I wanted to ask you about, because I was curious, are you still involved in, and I don't know if you have liberty to talk about this, but I know, correct me if I'm wrong, you're the CEO of a company. Is that correct? Is it ATP Therapeutics?
Yes, sir.
So can you think me and you've talked about this in the past, but it's been a while. What does all that entail? How's that going? If you want to talk about it, this is one of the last things I wanted to touch on, because I know that was like a personal interest of yours. So what is ATP Therapeutics all about?
So they're in the process, and we have two patents, or a patent in the U.S. pending and a patent in Europe pending. And it is the repurposing of two generic drugs. And I can go as deep into that as you want me to. So back to drug information. I get a call one day from a physician and says, hey, I started my patient on tramadol about a week ago, and he came in and says he can't ejaculate. Do you think that could be related to the tramadol? I said, yeah, this is kind of how it would do it. And I didn't think anything else about it. And 6 weeks go by, and someone else asked me a question about tramadol, completely unrelated to the first question. And it was more just of a dosing type question. And in the process, for whatever reason, talking to that person, I was like, there's not a drug on the market for premature ejaculation. So I go back to my office and I sit around and I think about it for a little while. And I was like, if somebody came to me and asked me to treat premature ejaculation in someone, how would I do it? And I thought about it for a pretty good while and actually went down to your dad's office and said, hey, Bill, what do you think about this idea? And he goes, man, that's a pretty good idea. So I began to look through the literature, and I had already decided on a combination of two drugs, and one is using escitalopram and tadalafil. And I did that for a couple of reasons. One, escitalopram is devoid of norepi effects, so it's less likely to cause any erectile type issues. It's purely a serotonin drug and has a lot of allosteric binding. If you look at some of the data out there, escitalopram appears to work quicker in depression. Well, some of that may be the allosteric binding. There may be some other reasons for that, but it was surrounded a lot of this allosteric binding that I was intrigued by. And then their kinetics match. Their half-lives, their duration of action are fairly similar. And so I thought the combination would work better than the single agent alone. Got a men's clinic in a part of the country here to actually do a little proof of concept for us on some compounded medication. It appeared to work, and we filed a patent.
That's awesome.
And it's been a long process. Hopefully the light is at the end of the tunnel. So, and like I said, I got a patent pending here it's a methods patent, and I have a methods patent pending in the EU. So
That's cool. I figured that was what it was for, but I just wanted to touch base on that because I know me and you talked about that when I was on rotation and stuff. And I know how difficult that patent process can be, because one of my mentors has been on the show a couple of times, and we've talked about the very product. We have a product containing it's a variety of different methylation donor groups, but it also has got an active ingredient from sesame oil called sesamin in it. And we've seen some interesting lowering effects in the small clinical trials that they've done at the center. And it took them quite a while to get a patent for it. And it's a lot of work that I don't think people realize just how much effort goes into that whole thing. And it's tough. So I commend you for doing that. I meant to ask you about that a while ago, because I know we'll chat every now and then on occasion, but it's real interesting because me at my work, we're in one of our startups at Nimbus Healthcare. We do a lot of like men's hormone optimization type stuff. And we're now in the hair loss space as well as the weight loss space too. And that's definitely an area that we do get questions about. So it's interesting to know that there's answers out there. I haven't had to counsel on anything like that in the pharmacy, but again, it's always good to know a mover and a shaker in the field that does know some things about that for sure.
I don't know. Like I said, it was a good, or at least I thought it was a good idea, or at least an interesting idea. And when then COVID hit, which just really, it derailed everything.
Yeah. It's not a fast process in general. And then if you have something like that happen, I want to pick your brain on one last thing. And I've said that like 4 times, so I apologize. I don't know I know you've got some friends, Dr. Barkley, I'm pretty sure you're in close contact. Are you guys, any idea on what's going on with the drug shortages right now? It's been kind of crazy to me how hard it's been to just get generic medications from our wholesaler in general. And it just seems random at this point. Initially, I thought it was COVID and the supply chain issues, and it very well could be that. But I was interested to see if you had any thoughts on why there's so many random products that I just can't order for people, because it's starting to get really frustrating having to have gaps in therapy for certain things for patients simply just because I can't get them at time.
And I don't know the answer to that. I do know that it is incredibly frustrating. Just dealing with one of the individuals at the hospital there that has to supply procurement for the hospital, UAMS, and just he was complaining every day. It was something. And there seemed to be no rhyme or reason to it. And I'm not a conspiracy theory person, but it almost seems like some of this is almost contrived at times. But it's a real issue. So, right now, there's no one in the country that manufactures physostigmine. So we moved around and trying to figure out how to use rivastigmine in people with an anticholinergic syndrome. And we found a pretty reasonable workaround with rivastigmine. It doesn't work as fast, but it does seem to work pretty well. We have been able to procure a little bit of physo that was recently released by the FDA. So we have a little bit, but a manufacturer out there needs to kick it back in and start making some of it.
Yeah, it's crazy. We've had some interesting shortages, and what blows my mind about it all is some of it's stuff that's not commonly prescribed. Like we have a few people that take, I won't even get into the specifics, but like certain medications for transplants that they'll use that they've been on for years. And it's just like, it's concerning to me that I have to check. I have to even think about that. Let me check and make sure I can get that before we fill that prescription. Same thing with Creon's been a big one for people with pancreatic enzyme issues. That one's been really hard to get. But I was just curious if you had any insider knowledge, because I was like, if this is affecting me at the local independent pharmacy level, I'm sure at an institution like UAMS, it's probably worse. Not to mention you're in the whole IB drug space and you're dealing with other medications that I wouldn't normally come across in just a normal pharmacy setting.
It hits everybody. And like you said, I mean, there is a very weird quality to it. I mean, I'm trying to remember what size IV bags they were out of for a while. You just couldn't get them.
Oh, yeah. I remember that too.
I think it may have been 100 ml bags, but I'm not sure. I don't have the answers to that. We need to start us our own manufacturing company, Patrick.
Yeah, that might be the next thing, because something's got to give. Yeah, I think another big one, we do some medication ordering for certain surgical centers in the area too. And it's been really hard to find lidocaine with epinephrine. It's weird. It's stuff that you wouldn't even think twice about. But Hal, I appreciate you being on the show. We're at about an hour and a half, which like I said, I've known you for a long enough time that I could talk to you for a long period of time about a variety of different topics, because I'm not trying to toot your own horn, but you're one of the smartest people that I've met in my entire tenure of pharmacy school and in all the interactions that I've had with you. So man, I really appreciate you coming on. I'd love to have you back on other episodes. If there's any other topics you want to dive into, I'm more than happy to sit down and talk with you. Give my best to Tammy and Boone as well. I miss you guys back in Arkansas. I need to come back in and say hi.
Well, I miss you being here, and some other time we probably ought to. There's some other areas we can delve off into. Fentanyl would be one of them. We didn't even bring that up tonight.
Yeah. It's another area for sure. I will definitely have you on, because I would love to pick your brain on that whole opioid crisis and stuff. I have my own opinion on it as a pharmacist in general, but that's something that I didn't even honestly think to bring up tonight, because I didn't think we'd get to it. But is that something is that something y'all see more from? Do y'all get calls about that at the center?
We get a few. A lot of times physicians won't call with a typical opioid overdose. I mean, they deal with them so frequently that they won't call, and I don't blame them. The fentanyl issue is a really interesting issue, and there are a lot of nuances to it and I have some pretty strong opinions on it, and I'll probably make a few people mad with them. So it's like I said, That's a topic for another day.
Yes, sir. I definitely would love to have you back on here soon and talk about that because I tend to bite my tongue a lot of times with my opinions on the whole matter. But again, I'd like to hear yours on that. So I'd definitely love to touch on that topic. But Hal, man,
Sure.
I appreciate you. Thank you for your time, and I'll have you on again soon.
Sure. Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
course.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Wellness Transcription Podcast. We hope you're inspired to live a healthier, more purpose-filled life in Christ. Remember, your well-being is a gift from God, and by taking care of your body, you give Him the glory. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, share, and leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you guys. Your continued support helps us spread this message of health and faith. Until next time, may God's grace and good choices guide your path to a life filled with joy, vitality, and a deeper connection with Jesus. God bless you all, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Your Space Coast vacation is preparing for liftoff. Start counting down now. 10, 9, 8, 7. It's time for a beach vacay that feels like heaven. 6, 5, 4. Come explore Melbourne and the beaches. 3, 2, 1. It's time for some rocket-filled fun. Count down to your best beach vacation ever on Florida's Space Coast. Launch your planning now at visitspacecoast.com. That's visitspacecoast.com.
Selling your car to Carvana is as easy as...
As easy as pie?
Sure. All you have to do is enter your license plate or VIN.
As easy as a stroll in the park.
Okay, then just answer a few questions and you'll get a real offer in seconds.
As easy as singing.
Why not? Schedule a pickup or drop off and Carvana will pay you that amount right on the spot.
As easy as playing guitar.
Actually, I find that kind of difficult. But selling your car to Carvana is as easy as...
Can be.
Visit Carvana.com or download the app to get an instant offer today.